Beneath the neon sign, the rain pattered softly against the windshield as Ethan Cole sat in his car, staring through the fogged glass at the glowing neon sign of Rosie's Diner. The sign flickered, a bright red and yellow beacon trying its best to look welcoming through the drizzle. It wasn't the first diner Ethan had built, but it was one of the first to bear his company's mark. He still remembered standing in the mud on opening day, sleeves rolled up, shaking hands with the first customers who walked through the door. That was 12 years ago. Now Ethan sat slouched in the driver's seat, wearing a threadbare hoodie with a fraying cuff and a Mariners baseball cap pulled low over his face. He glanced at the scruffy beard in the rearview mirror and felt a brief flicker of self-consciousness. Ethan Cole, founder and CEO of Cole Comfort Diners, now disguised as a regular man with no company car, no polished smile, and no entourage of managers or investors. Just a tired guy in a damp hoodie, about to order a burger. He was here because of the whispers. The numbers coming from this location weren't terrible, but the complaints, rude staff, long waits, burned food, told a different story. His regional managers, glued to spreadsheets and performance metrics, brushed it off as minor operational friction. But Ethan knew better. The heart of a diner isn't in the numbers. It's in the atmosphere, the way the staff smiles, the way regulars feel at home, the way a waitress remembers your favorite coffee. That warmth, the thing Ethan had built his dream around, seemed to be missing. And so, he came to find out why. He stepped out into the misty air and crossed the cracked pavement, the chime above the door jangling softly as he stepped inside. The smell of fryer grease and stale coffee hung heavy in the air, but underneath it, there was something else. A tension so subtle it took him a moment to notice it. The silence between conversations was just a little too long. The smiles from the staff a little too forced. The dining area was half full, a mix of retirees nursing their coffee, a table of teenagers with their phones glued to their hands, and a lone trucker picking at a slice of pie. The booths were worn at the edges, the vinyl cracked and patched in places, but that was normal. It wasn't the furniture Ethan worried about. It was the people. A waitress, no older than her mid-20s, approached with a notepad clutched to her side. Her name tag read Lena. Her smile was warm, but her eyes were tired, shadowed with the kind of fatigue that no amount of makeup could hide. "Hey there, welcome to Rosie's," she said, her voice bright but rehearsed. "What can I get you to drink?" "Just coffee," Ethan said, keeping his voice casual. "Black." "Coming right up." She turned on her heel, but Ethan noticed the way her shoulders sagged ever so slightly when she thought no one was looking. As Lena moved through the diner, Ethan watched her. She had the kind of quiet efficiency that only came with experience, anticipating customers' needs before they asked, offering refills without hesitation. But there was something brittle underneath, a layer of stress, like a rubber band stretched too thin. Behind the counter, a man in a grease-stained polo leaned against the kitchen door. His arms were crossed, his mouth twisted into a perpetual frown. Ethan didn't need an introduction to know who he was, the manager. Every diner had one like him. The ones who survived not because they were the best, but because they were the most stubborn. Lena returned with his coffee, setting it down gently. "Need a minute with the menu?" "Nah," Ethan said, sliding the laminated menu aside. "Burger and fries. Medium." She scribbled the order down, but her pen hovered for a moment before she turned away. Ethan caught a flash of hesitation, something just beneath the surface. He didn't press, not yet. There would be time for questions later. As he sipped his coffee, he listened, not just to the conversations at the tables, but to the kitchen, the clatter of pans, the low bark of orders called out, and underneath it, the sound of stress. It was in the hurried footsteps, the clipped responses, the too loud scraping of metal on metal. A sharp voice rang out from the kitchen. "Lena, that order should have been out 5 minutes ago. What the hell are you doing?" The words hit the air like a slap, cutting through the low hum of conversation. Heads turned briefly, then just as quickly turned away. No one wanted to get involved. Ethan saw Lena flinch, her hand briefly curling into a fist before she forced it flat against the counter. Her voice, when it came, was soft but steady. "Coming right up." Ethan's grip tightened around his coffee cup. The words, the tone, they had no place here. Not in his diner. When Lena returned with his plate, Ethan saw the faint tremble in her hand as she set it down. "Sorry for the wait," she murmured. "No worries," Ethan said gently. "You're doing great." The words were simple, but the flicker in her expression told him they meant something. For a moment, just a moment, the smile she gave him was real. As Ethan ate, he watched more than he tasted. The way the manager barked at the kitchen staff. The way the cook, a wiry man with a buzz cut, kept his head down and moved with mechanical efficiency. The way Lena covered for another waitress who had disappeared into the back for too long. It was a dance of survival, every step performed under the weight of invisible pressure. The muffled sound of crying drifted through the kitchen door, so faint Ethan almost thought he imagined it. But when he set his fork down and strained to listen, the sound came again, choked and raw. He stood without thinking, leaving his half-eaten burger behind. The kitchen door swung open, and there she was. Lena, her back to the wall, shoulders shaking. The manager stood a few feet away, arms crossed, mouth still moving even as Ethan stepped inside. "Can't keep making excuses," the manager was saying. "If you can't handle the pressure, maybe you should find somewhere easier." Lena wiped at her eyes with the sleeve of her uniform. "I'm trying," she whispered. "I haven't had a break since I clocked in." "And whose fault is that?" The manager's voice was loud, indifferent. "We've all got jobs to do." Ethan's voice was quiet, but it cut through the air like a knife. "Is there a problem here?" The manager turned, eyes narrowing at the scruffy man in the hoodie. "Who the hell are you?" Ethan stepped further into the kitchen, calm but unyielding. "Just someone who doesn't like seeing employees treated like garbage." The manager's mouth twisted into a sneer. "Stay out of it, buddy. You have no idea how hard this place is to run." Ethan's eyes didn't waver. "I have a pretty good idea." Lena's eyes darted between them, wide and panicked. "It's fine," she said quickly. "Really, it's—" "No," Ethan said softly. "It's not." The silence hung between them, thick with unspoken truths. The manager turned back toward the grill, muttering under his breath. Damn customers thinking they owned the place. Ethan stepped back, letting the moment settle. He wasn't ready to pull the curtain back just yet, but he'd seen enough to know one thing. Tomorrow, the mask would come off. And no one, not Lena, not the manager, and not the diners who'd come to expect silence, would be ready for what came next. Cracks in the foundation. Ethan didn't sleep much that night. Back in his modest motel room, the rain still drumming against the window, he replayed everything he'd seen at Rosie's diner. The manager, a man whose name tag he never even caught, loomed large in Ethan's mind. He wasn't the only bad manager Ethan had ever dealt with, but something about the quiet resignation on Lena's face haunted him. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even fear. It was worse than that. It was the kind of numbness that only came after too many shifts like that. Too many days spent swallowing frustration. Too many nights crying in the car after work. Too many times hearing, "That's just the way it is." He built Cole Comfort Diners to be the opposite of that, or at least he thought he had. Ethan stared at the ceiling until the first gray light of morning crept in, then threw on his hoodie and jeans, shoved his notepad into his pocket, and headed back. The diner was quiet when he stepped inside, the chime above the door ringing hollow in the stillness. The smell of coffee just starting to brew was thick in the air, and the floors were still damp from a half-hearted mop job. Behind the counter, Lena stood with her back to him, setting out salt shakers and wiping down menus. The slump of her shoulders was more pronounced than the day before, her motions mechanical. This wasn't just tiredness. This was the weight of knowing exactly what kind of day lay ahead before it even started. "Morning," Ethan said, keeping his voice low. Lena jumped slightly, spinning around. When she saw it was him, the scruffy man from yesterday, her smile flickered on, brief and automatic. "Oh, hey," she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Back again so soon." "Best burger I've had in a while," Ethan lied with an easy smile, though neither of them believed it. "Figured I'd start my day here." Lena's smile faltered for half a second, then returned. "Coffee? Please." She poured it without another word, and Ethan slid into the same booth he occupied the day before. A single older man sat at the counter nursing a coffee, and a teenage busboy moved listlessly between tables, stacking chairs back onto the floor. Ethan watched them all, but mostly he watched Lena. She was fast, faster than she should have been at this hour, her body still in that shift-long panic mode that never quite turned off. She filled napkin dispensers, rearranged condiments, and sorted menus like the weight of the whole place rested on her. And maybe it did. The kitchen door swung open with a metallic creak, and Ethan's stomach knotted. The manager was back, his stained polo replaced with a fresh one, but the scowl on his face unchanged. His eyes flicked to Ethan's booth, but there was no sign of recognition. Just another customer, another body in a seat. "Lena." The manager's bark made Ethan's blood pressure spike. "Where the hell is the produce order? It was supposed to be in last night." Lena tensed, her hand tightening around the coffee pot. "I called them again this morning. They said it's running late, and you didn't think to tell me. Don't make excuses." He was already turning away, muttering under his breath. "I swear, I have to do everything around here." Lena closed her eyes for a moment, just long enough to swallow whatever reply had been forming. When she opened them again, the smile was back, thinner this time, but still there. Ethan's fists clenched under the table. He could step in right now, tell the manager exactly who he was, send him packing, and fix everything with one signature on a termination form. But that wouldn't solve the problem. The manager wasn't the disease. He was a symptom. The disease was deeper. It was in the culture. It was in the way no one complained, no one pushed back, no one expected better, because better had never come. That was Ethan's failure. He needed to see just how deep the rot went. "Lena," Ethan said softly when she passed by again. "Can I ask you something?" She blinked, wary. "Sure." "Are you the only one working this morning?" Her eyes darted to the clock. "Connor's supposed to be here soon." "Connor, line cook. He's only been here a few months, but he's good. He tries." Ethan heard the unspoken words. Tries, but it doesn't make a difference. Tries, but the manager grinds everyone down eventually. The kitchen door creaked again, and a younger man emerged, wiping his hands on a damp towel. Slim, with dark curls falling into his eyes, Connor carried himself with a nervous energy, the kind of person who was used to being the target even when it wasn't his fault. He shot Lena a quick, apologetic smile. "Sorry I'm late. My car wouldn't start." Lena just shook her head. "You're fine." The manager, of course, had heard. "Of course it wouldn't," he muttered, just loud enough for everyone to hear. "One more excuse, and you'll be walking." Connor's face burned red, but he didn't reply, just ducked into the kitchen, the swinging door flapping behind him. Ethan pushed his coffee aside. He'd seen enough. The morning wore on, the diner filling slowly with regulars. Ethan kept his notepad in his lap, jotting down everything. The way customers grumbled about wait times, the way Lena never stopped moving, the way the manager spent more time complaining than actually managing. Around 10, a young mother with a fussy toddler settled into a corner booth. The little boy kicked his feet against the seat, whining until Lena appeared with a paper menu and a handful of crayons. Her smile was warm and genuine, the first real smile Ethan had seen all morning. And for a moment, The tension in her shoulders eased. She was good at this, better than anyone Ethan had hired in years, and she was hanging on by a thread. The manager, as if sensing a moment of peace, stormed out of the kitchen again, waving a clipboard. "Lena, this invoice doesn't match what we got last week. Did you screw up the order?" Lena's smile vanished. "I used the template you gave me." "Then why is it wrong?" "I don't know." Her voice was smaller now. "Of course you don't," he sneered. Ethan had seen enough. He slid out of the booth and crossed the diner in 3 strides, stopping just inside the kitchen doorway. "Is this how you run your shifts?" The manager's head snapped up. "Excuse me." "Yelling at your staff in front of customers, blaming them for supply issues that are out of their control." The manager's lip curled. "Who do you think you are?" Ethan's hands settled into his pockets, and for the first time, his voice carried the quiet weight of authority. "Someone who's about to change everything." The manager took a step forward, puffing his chest. "Look, buddy, unless you own this place." "I do." The words hung in the air, cold and final. Lena froze. Connor peeked out from the kitchen, wide-eyed. The manager's face drained of color. Ethan's smile was thin. "My name is Ethan Cole, and you and I need to talk." The weight of names. The manager, whose name tag Ethan could now see read Troy, stood with his arms crossed over his chest, though the bravado was already starting to slip. His mouth opened once, then closed, his mind clearly racing to recalculate the situation. Lena stood frozen by the coffee machine, her eyes wide, her fingers still clutching the sugar packet so tightly it crumpled in her hand. Connor peeked out from the kitchen, half hidden behind the doorframe, caught between curiosity and caution. Troy finally spoke, his voice a thin veneer of defiance over rising panic. "Look, I didn't know you were coming." "That's obvious," Ethan said flatly. He wasn't angry. Not in the yelling, fists on the table way some CEOs might be. This was worse. His voice was calm, the kind of calm that made people shift in their seats, knowing something much bigger was coming. "Why don't we have a chat?" Ethan said, motioning toward the back office. Troy didn't move. "Now." Troy's jaw clenched, but after a few seconds, he spun on his heel and stalked toward the narrow hallway leading to the office. Ethan followed, pausing just long enough to glance at Lena. "You're doing great," he said softly. She swallowed hard and gave a stiff, uncertain nod. The office was smaller than Ethan remembered, probably because he hadn't set foot in it in over 6 years. A metal desk with a dented corner, a scuffed-up office chair, and filing cabinets that were 2 decades out of date. Troy dropped into the chair like he owned the place, arms still folded, his defensiveness bubbling just beneath the surface. Ethan didn't sit. He stood with his hands in his hoodie pockets, leaning casually against the doorframe, his posture relaxed, but his presence heavy enough to make Troy squirm. "So," Ethan said, voice calm, "how long have you been managing this location?" Troy scratched his jaw, buying time. "Couple years." 3.5, Ethan corrected, "according to your file." Troy's eyes flicked up. You already checked." Ethan shrugged. "I've been watching this place for weeks. The complaints, the turnover, the customer reviews. It's why I'm here." Troy sat up straighter, the realization hitting him in real time. "You came here undercover. What, to spy on me?" "Not just you," Ethan said. "On the culture. On the way this place runs when no one thinks corporate's watching." Troy's face twisted into something caught between a scowl and a sneer. "Well, we're short-staffed. It's not my fault. No one wants to work anymore. I'm doing the best I can with what I've got." Ethan tilted his head slightly, like a detective who already knew the answer. "Are you?" Troy's eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "I've been here 2 days," Ethan said, pushing off the doorframe. "I've seen you snap at Lena more times than I can count. I've seen Connor shrink every time you walk past the kitchen door. I've watched customers get ignored while you stood around complaining about orders being late. And you're right. You're short-staffed. But whose job is it to make this a place people actually want to work? Troy's mouth opened, but Ethan didn't give him a chance. It's yours. Ethan's voice was still calm, but the steel underneath was unmistakable. Your job is to build a team, not break one. To set the tone, not tear people down. Customers can feel it. They walk in here and sense the tension before they even sit down. That's why they don't come back. Not because the fries are cold, but because the place feels cold. Troy's face flushed. It's not like that. Ethan took a slow step forward, and despite himself, Troy leaned back in his chair. It's exactly like that. And the fact that you can't see it is why you're sitting here right now. Troy's fingers drummed against the armrest. What do you want me to do? I'm just trying to keep the place running. Not anymore, Ethan said quietly. Effective immediately. You're done here. Troy's eyes widened. What? You heard me. You can't just. I can, Ethan said, his tone leaving no room for debate. You'll get your severance. HR will reach out. But your time in this diner is over. For a moment, Troy just sat there stunned. Then his face hardened. You can't run this place without me. We already are, Ethan said softly. Troy shoved back his chair and stormed past Ethan, slamming the office door so hard the filing cabinet rattled. Ethan stood alone for a moment, exhaling slowly, his hand brushing through his hair. Firing people never felt good, even when they deserved it. But this was more than Troy. This was about the cracks in the foundation. Cracks Ethan himself had allowed to form by trusting reports and ignoring reality. When Ethan returned to the dining room, the place was quiet. Lena stood near the coffee machine, her hands curled around the edge of the counter. Connor was peeking through the kitchen window, uncertainty written across his face. Ethan walked up to the counter and leaned on it. You two have a minute. Lena glanced at Connor, then nodded hesitantly. They moved to the booth in the back, the same one Ethan had sat in the day before, and slid into the seats across from him. Up close, they both looked younger than Ethan had realized. Tired, yes, but young. People who hadn't given up yet, even if the cracks were starting to show. I know this is a lot, Ethan started. I'm sorry you had to find out who I am like this. Lena shook her head quickly. It's just, I didn't expect. Neither did I, Ethan admitted. I thought the company I built was still the same place I started. I thought managers were treating their teams with respect. I thought people wanted to work here because it felt like family. Connor snorted softly, then immediately clapped a hand over his mouth, like he hadn't meant to let it slip. Ethan smiled faintly. It's okay. You're right. Somewhere along the way, we lost that. Neither of them said anything, so Ethan continued. I need your help, Ethan said simply. You too, and anyone else willing to stick it out. You're the heart of this place. You know what's broken. You've been the ones keeping it afloat, even when the people above you made it harder. Lena's brow furrowed. What are you saying? I'm saying I want to rebuild this place, Ethan said. Not just the diner, but the culture. I want it to be the kind of place where you're proud to work, where customers come in because they feel welcome, not just because they're hungry. Connor's voice was quiet, but steady. You mean it? I do, Ethan said. And it's not just talk. We'll start hiring again. People you trust, not just warm bodies. You'll get regular breaks, raises, better schedules, and you'll have a say. If something's not working, I want to know. Lena's eyes shimmered slightly, but she blinked it away. That sounds amazing. Connor shifted in his seat. What about a new manager? We'll bring someone in, Ethan said. But until we do, I'll be here. Their eyes widened in unison. You're staying? Lena asked. For as long as it takes, Ethan said. Lena's smile was small, but real this time. I've never worked somewhere where the owner knew my name. Well, Ethan said, you do now. For the first time in far too long, hope settled into the air. Fragile, but real. And it was only the beginning. Rebuilding brick by brick. The next morning, Ethan was back at Rosie's diner before the sun had fully risen. The sky outside was still a sleepy gray, the air cool with the scent of damp pavement and the faint aroma of coffee drifting from the small kitchen window. This time, Ethan wasn't just there to observe. He was there to work. He walked through the front door not as the CEO, but as a man rolling up his sleeves to help clean up the mess, both literal and figurative. His hoodie sleeves were pushed to his elbows, exposing the calluses on his hands from a past life, one that involved more dishwashing and grease scraping than boardrooms and spreadsheets. The teenager tasked with opening, a kid named Kyle with headphones draped around his neck, looked up in confusion as Ethan strode in, carrying a small notepad and a folder stuffed with papers. Kyle squinted at him. Are you, like, the health inspector?" Ethan grinned. "Worse. I'm the guy who signs your paycheck." Kyle's face paled so fast that Ethan actually felt a little bad for him. "Relax," Ethan said, clapping him lightly on the shoulder. "You're not in trouble. You can help me, though. Grab a bucket. We're cleaning before the breakfast rush." Kyle, clearly unsure whether this was a joke or not, shuffled toward the supply closet. Ethan followed him, already making mental notes about the state of the place. Grease buildup under the fryer, cobwebs along the ceiling edges, a vent near the kitchen that was so clogged with dust it was probably a fire hazard. When Lena arrived, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her hair tied back into a hurried ponytail, she stopped dead in the doorway. Ethan was standing on a chair, scrubbing the ceiling vent with a rag, his sleeves smeared with grime. "What are you doing?" she asked, half laughing in disbelief. "Turns out," Ethan said, hopping down, "this place is dirtier than it looks." Lena set her bag behind the counter, the smile lingering on her face. It was small, but real. "I mean, yeah, we're kind of used to it." "Not anymore," Ethan said. "We're going to fix that." Lena's smile flickered, her eyes scanning the empty diner as if trying to picture it. Not the way it was now, but the way Ethan described. Cleaner, warmer, safer. She didn't say anything, but the flicker of hope in her expression was enough. Step 1. Listen before you fix. By mid-morning, Ethan had gathered the whole staff, all 6 of them, around the largest booth. Connor sat at the far end, still unsure whether Ethan's promises would stick. Kyle sat across from him, legs jiggling nervously under the table. Lena was sandwiched between them, her hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug. Ethan stood at the head of the table, not towering over them, but standing beside them. A subtle choice, but intentional. "Okay," Ethan began. "I want to hear from you, all of you. No filters, no sugarcoating." They stared at him, hesitant. "I mean it," Ethan said. "What's working here? What's not? What's making you want to quit before your shift even starts?" Kyle, unsurprisingly, spoke first. "The schedule sucks." Connor shot him a look, but Ethan just nodded. "Tell me more." "I'm always closing," Kyle said. "I got school in the mornings, but Troy didn't care. I told him, like 5 times, that I can't stay past 10, but I still end up here till midnight half the week." Ethan jotted something in his notebook. "That's going to change." "What else?" Connor spoke up next, his voice quiet. "There's no backup. When someone calls out, there's no plan. We just scramble." "Every time," Lena added softly. "And then we get yelled at when things get backed up." Ethan's stomach twisted, not at the words themselves, but at how unsurprised they all were by it. This was normal for them. Dysfunction was their baseline. "We'll fix staffing," Ethan said. "We'll build an actual pool of people we can call, and if we're short, we'll adjust expectations. No more forcing 2 people to do the work of 5. Kyle's eyes lit up. "Wait, for real?" "For real," Ethan said. "What else?" The responses poured in. The equipment breakdowns that never got fixed, the lack of training for new hires, the time Troy screamed at a dishwasher so badly they walked out mid-shift. Every story was another crack in the foundation, another piece of evidence that the rot went deeper than Ethan had feared. But none of them left. That was what struck Ethan the most. They were still here. Despite all of it, they were still showing up, still trying, still holding the place together with sheer willpower. It was proof, in a strange way, that Rosie's Diner still had a pulse. Ethan looked around the table at the end of their impromptu meeting. "Thank you," he said, "for being honest, for staying, even when it felt impossible." Lena's fingers twisted in her lap. "We didn't really have a choice." "You do now," Ethan said firmly. "And I hope you'll choose to stay. Because I'm not giving up on this place. I'm not giving up on any of you." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy, yes, but with possibility, not dread. Step 2. Fix what's broken. Ethan's first order of business, after the meeting, was the equipment. The fryer, the dishwasher, the temperamental griddle that sometimes refused to heat past lukewarm. All of it had been jury-rigged and duct-taped far beyond its intended lifespan. By lunchtime, Ethan was in the kitchen, grease-stained and sweating alongside Connor as they pried open the fryer's side panel. "Isn't this, like, beneath you?" Connor asked cautiously. "Running a business isn't about being above anyone," Ethan replied, pulling out a burned-out heating element. "I'm the guy who signed the lease on this place, but that doesn't mean I can't fix a fryer." Connor grinned. A rare sight. Troy never even came back here unless something was already on fire. "Well," Ethan said, "we're going to stop waiting for fires. Step 3. Make it real." It wasn't just equipment. Ethan called his regional manager that afternoon, not to scold him, not yet, but to put the wheels in motion. Hiring ads went up that day. A cleaning service was booked for a deep scrub after hours. Uniform replacements were ordered. No more threadbare aprons and shirts with the old logo peeling off. And most importantly, Ethan made one last phone call to a former manager named Cynthia, who had left Cole Comfort Diners years earlier after a corporate shakeup. Cynthia had built some of the best teams in Ethan's history, and he was ready to admit that letting her go had been a mistake. "Come back," Ethan said, pacing outside the diner, rain misting down. "Help me fix this." Cynthia was quiet for a moment. Then, under one condition. "Name it." "You actually listen this time." Ethan smiled. "Deal." By nightfall, when Lena closed out her drawer that night, Ethan was still there, sweeping the kitchen, grease-stained and exhausted, but smiling. "You're really staying, huh?" Lena asked, leaning on the counter. "For as long as it takes," Ethan said. Lena's smile was slow, but it was real. For the first time in a long time, Rosie's Diner felt like it might become what it was always meant to be, a place where people belonged. Restoring the heartbeat. The first change wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, almost invisible, but deeply felt. It came at 7:32 a.m., when Lena stepped through the door, still adjusting her ponytail, and saw Ethan standing behind the counter, a carafe of fresh coffee in one hand and a mop in the other. "Good morning," Ethan said like it was the easiest thing in the world. Lena stopped in her tracks. For a second, she looked at him like he was a hologram, some mirage her overworked mind had conjured. "You're here." "I said I would be." Ethan leaned the mop against the counter. "You're not the only one who can handle a coffee rush." Lena's smile was small, still hesitant, but it was there. "You're seriously working here. Like, actually working. Uniform and everything." Ethan tugged at the collar of the new Rosie's Diner polo he'd ordered for himself. No executive perks, either. Same breaks, same side work. "If you do it, I do it." Lena shook her head in disbelief, but she wasn't laughing at him. She was amazed. For the first time in a long time, She wasn't alone at the starting line of the day. Bricks and mortar. The early hours were slow, only a handful of customers trickling in for coffee and breakfast sandwiches. It gave Ethan time to clean, really clean, and he didn't do it alone. Connor arrived just after 8 o'clock, eyes still heavy from lack of sleep, and found Ethan on his knees behind the fryer, scraping away years of caked-on grease. "Ah, what are you doing?" Connor asked, blinking hard. "Something that should have been done a year ago," Ethan grunted, wiping his forehead with the sleeve of his polo. "Grab me that bucket." Connor hesitated, then did as he was asked. Together, they spent the next hour scrubbing, dismantling, and reorganizing the back line. Neither of them spoke much, but something changed in those quiet moments. The invisible line between boss and worker started to blur. When the fryer was spotless, Ethan stood up and clapped Connor on the shoulder. "Appreciate the help." "No problem," Connor muttered, but there was the faintest flicker of pride in his expression. Culture is contagious. By lunchtime, word had started to spread, not just among the Rosie's staff, but among the customers. Regulars who had grown used to slouching through their meals, barely acknowledged by overstretched waitresses, now found Ethan, scruffy, smiling Ethan, delivering their coffee refills himself. "Morning, folks," Ethan said to a table of retirees who came in every Tuesday. "Let me know if there's anything you need." The oldest of the group, a man in suspenders who had once run a hardware store in town, squinted at him. "You're not one of the usuals." "Nope," Ethan said easily. "Just helping out." The man's eyes drifted to the name tag Ethan wore, the same as Lena's and Connor's, except where theirs had first names. His simply read, "Ethan." "Nice to meet you, Ethan," the old man said with a small nod. "Haven't seen someone mop the floor in this place since Obama was president." Ethan grinned, trying to bring back the classics. Word of mouth spread faster than any marketing campaign ever could. Customers noticed when the tables were cleaner, the food came out faster, and the servers actually smiled. It wasn't perfect. They were still understaffed, and the menu hadn't changed. But the atmosphere, that was shifting, and people could feel it. The power of permission. At 2 p.m., during a lull between lunch and the early dinner crowd, Ethan gathered Lena, Connor, and Kyle near the counter. They stood awkwardly, unsure what to expect. "All right," Ethan said, leaning against the counter. "I want to talk about permission." Lena frowned. "Permission for what?" "For you, all of you, to make decisions," Ethan said. "To do what you think is right, even if I'm not here." Connor's brow furrowed. "What kind of decisions?" "Little things at first," Ethan said. "You see a regular who always orders decaf. Bring it to them without waiting for them to ask. You notice a family with kids struggling to keep them entertained. Offer them crayons or a snack on the house. If you see something that could make this place better, do it." Kyle looked skeptical. "You sure?" "Troy used to freak out if we did anything without his okay." "Troy's gone," Ethan said simply. "I want you to act like you belong here." "Because you do." Lena's hand rose hesitantly. "What about complaints?" Ethan smiled. "You hear one. You fix it. If you need backup, you come to me. But you don't need anyone's permission to care." That was the real culture shift. For years, the staff had been trained to survive, to follow orders, to avoid attention, to minimize risk. Ethan was asking them to do the opposite, to care, to invest, to take pride, not just in their paychecks, but in the place itself. Immediate returns. That afternoon, a mother with a baby in a high chair and a fussy toddler slid into a booth. Normally, Lena would have braced herself for the inevitable meltdown. But this time, she walked over with a basket of crackers before the toddler could even work up a proper tantrum. "These are on the house," Lena said with a smile. "Coloring sheets are on the way." The mother blinked, stunned. "Oh, thank you. Happy to help," Lena said. And for the first time, she meant it. Ethan the dishwasher. By dinner, Ethan was at the dish pit. sleeves rolled up, scrubbing plates as the dinner rush hit full speed. Lena and Connor worked the floor with the new sense of freedom Ethan had gifted them, improvising solutions instead of waiting for permission. Ethan caught snippets of their conversation between orders. "Go ahead and seat them. I'll cover table 5. Connor, grab that water pitcher. Thanks. Lena, this kid's gluten-free. Can we swap fries for fruit?" Not once did Ethan hear, "I have to ask the manager." They were the ones in charge now, not through title, but through trust. And the customers felt it. Smiles were easier. Conversations lingered longer. The tension that had hovered like a storm cloud over Rosie's Diner for years was starting to clear. One last gesture. At the end of the shift, as the last customers left and the kitchen quieted, Ethan gathered the staff once more. "This is just the start," Ethan said, voice calm but confident. "But I need you all to know something." They waited. "This isn't my diner," Ethan said. "It's ours. Yours, mine, and everyone who walks through that door." Lena bit her lip, eyes shimmering slightly. "It doesn't feel like just a job anymore." "That's the goal," Ethan said softly. "If we can make it feel like home, for you, for the customers, then we're doing it right." The silence that followed was warm. The silence of people realizing, maybe for the first time, that they mattered. And for Ethan, it was the sound of hope, the heartbeat of a diner finding its pulse again. Homecoming. The first time Ethan Cole truly knew Rosie's Diner was going to make it wasn't when the numbers improved, though they eventually did. It wasn't when the customer complaints slowed to a trickle, or even when he saw the first 5-star review posted online in over a year. It was the laughter. A week after Troy's departure, Ethan was standing by the counter, sorting through fresh produce deliveries, when he heard it. A full, unrestrained laugh, loud enough to bounce off the walls and roll into the kitchen. It came from Lena. She was doubled over slightly, holding onto the back of a booth for support, tears of mirth glistening in her eyes as Connor stood next to her, pantomiming some ridiculous story about a customer who had tried to pay for their meal with a lottery ticket. For the first time since Ethan had walked through those doors, the sound of real, effortless joy filled the air. That was the moment he knew. The diner was coming back to life. Planting roots, not just fixing leaks. The changes Ethan put in place weren't temporary fixes. They were foundational shifts, each one reinforcing the message that this place was more than a paycheck. Staffing was stabilized first. Ethan didn't just throw job postings online. He personally called former employees who had left because of Troy's management. Some were hesitant, reluctant to return to the scene of so much stress. But when they heard Troy was gone, and even more, that Ethan himself was helping rebuild, a surprising number agreed to come back. Some, like Maya, a night shift waitress who had left 6 months earlier, were wary. When she returned for her first shift, her eyes constantly darted to the kitchen window, waiting for the bark of criticism that never came. Instead, Connor greeted her with a grin, already setting up her station with silverware rolls and a pitcher of water. "Welcome back," he said, and for the first time, Maya believed those words. Reclaiming ownership, together. The biggest shift happened the day Ethan held a staff meeting unlike any they'd had before. No clipboards, no performance reviews, no awkward silences where employees were afraid to speak up. Instead, Ethan stood at the center of the dining room after closing, holding the whiteboard marker. "All right," he said, "I've talked enough. Tonight, you're in charge. We're rebuilding this place, but not just how I want it, how you want it." Lena blinked. "Us. All of you," Ethan said. "This is your home. You know what works and what doesn't. You know what customers actually want, not just what some corporate menu says they want." Slowly, hesitantly, hands started to rise. "The booths," Kyle said. "Can we get new cushions? My knees are gonna snap from kneeling on these things." "Done," Ethan said, writing it on the board. "We need a real break schedule," Maya added. Not just take 5 minutes if you can. Like actual breaks. Absolutely, Ethan said. It snowballed from there. A flood of ideas, complaints, wishes, and frustrations that had been bottled up for years. Some were small, new aprons that didn't feel like cardboard. Some were big, rethinking the entire order process to avoid the dreaded ticket backlog. Ethan didn't say yes to everything, but he listened, truly listened. And when the meeting ended, every voice in that room felt a little louder, a little more confident than when it started. A celebration of change. 2 weeks later, Rosie's Diner closed early for something no one had expected. A staff appreciation dinner. Ethan ordered catering from a nearby Italian place. Enough lasagna, garlic bread, and salad to feed double their staff. He rented a cheap karaoke machine and dragged a few tables together to form one long communal table. There was no agenda, no speeches, no motivational team-building exercises, just food, laughter, and the feeling of belonging. Even the teenage busboy, Kyle, who had once muttered about quitting every shift, stood up and sang a painfully off-key version of Sweet Caroline to roaring applause. Ethan watched it all, standing quietly near the coffee machine with a plate of food in hand, soaking in the warmth of it. Lena slid up beside him, her own plate half finished. "You know," she said, voice soft, "I used to hate coming to work." Ethan glanced at her. "Not anymore." She shook her head. "Now, I kind of look forward to it." Ethan's throat tightened. "That's what I always wanted this place to be." "It is now," Lena said simply. "We made it that way." The final reveal. The next morning, Ethan held one last team meeting, this time with a slightly more official tone. The mood was still warm, but there was a quiet anticipation in the air. "I want to thank you all," Ethan began, hands clasped on the counter. "When I walked in here a few weeks ago, I thought I'd just find some operational issues. Maybe a bad manager, some staffing problems." He paused. "But I found so much more than that." The room was silent. "I found people who were holding this place together with nothing but sheer willpower. People who should have walked away but stayed because they cared, even when no one cared back." Lena looked down at the floor, but there was a smile playing at the corner of her mouth. "I can't fix everything from corporate," Ethan continued, "no matter how much I want to. The only way this place works is if you own it, really own it." He pulled a folder from the counter and opened it, revealing a profit-sharing agreement. "You're not just employees anymore," Ethan said. "Starting next quarter, you're all partners. A percentage of every dollar this diner makes, after costs, goes right back into your pockets." Connor's jaw dropped. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," Ethan said. "Because you've earned it." Lena's voice was barely a whisper. "No one's ever done that for us." Ethan smiled softly. "Maybe it's about time someone did." Legacy in good hands. Ethan didn't leave immediately. He stayed for another month, training a new manager, Cynthia, the no-nonsense former employee he'd begged to come back. Cynthia understood how to run a diner, but more importantly, she understood how to lead with heart. She didn't need to bark orders. She knew how to listen, to pull the best out of people instead of squeezing them dry. On Ethan's last day, Lena handed him a folded napkin before his shift ended. "For you," she said, blushing slightly. Ethan unfolded it, revealing a messy scrawl in blue ink. "Thank you for making us matter again." He swallowed hard, blinking against the sudden sting in his eyes. "You always mattered," he said softly. "You just needed someone to see it." As he stepped out into the afternoon sunlight, the neon sign above Rosie's Diner flickered. But this time, it felt less like a failing bulb and more like a heartbeat finding its rhythm again. The diner was in good hands now. Not just his, theirs. And that was the way it was always meant to be.